Okay, here we go. Stand by. 3, 2, 1.
The thinking atheist. It's not a person. It's a symbol. An idea.
The population of atheists in this country is going through the roof.
Rejecting faith. Pursuing knowledge. Challenging the sacred.
If I tell the truth, it's because I tell the truth. Not because I put my hand on a book and made a wish.
And working together for a more rational world.
Take the risk of thinking for yourself. Much more happiness, truth, beauty, and wisdom will come to you that way.
Assume nothing. Question everything. And start thinking. This is the Thinking Atheist Podcast. Hosted by Seth Andrews.
So if you know this show, and you know me, you know that I have occasionally had Yvette D'Entremont, the SciBabe, an analytical chemist and an extremely sarcastic science educator. I've had her on the show. I've interviewed her on video. And so I happened to see one of her Moment of Science posts. And she does this, I guess, every few days. It posts to her Patreon and it posts on Facebook. And she just gets into these random tidbits of science and history and just stuff that you probably did not know. And of course, it's laced with wit and profanity and all that. So she's educating as she's entertaining. And I found myself just binging. I read one moment of science and then I segued to the next moment of science and the next and the next and the next until finally I messaged her because she's a friend. And I said, look, Yvette, I want to do a whole show of these where I just read from your Moment of Science post, just some random ones, and then maybe you and I can talk at the end. Would that be okay? And so she has given me the car keys, and that's what the broadcast is. I'm just going to read random and cherry-picked Moment of Science posts up on the roster. And again, I just grabbed a few of these at random. We're going to talk about sea monsters, or what she calls nightmare fuel. We've got pervert penguins. We're going to talk about nuclear energy. I may read the article about chiropractic. That's a long one and a hugely contentious one, but I'm interested. And we'll start with an article that she did, A Moment of Science, on Coco, the quote-unquote talking gorilla. And if the comment section is any indication, people have really taken Coco personally. They've taken Coco into their minds and hearts. Anyway, we're going to talk about Coco here in just a second. Before we get underway, I dream weird things. Like, why does my unconscious brain spirit me away so I can, fly with wings that are made of tortilla chips over a zombie apocalypse where all of the undead have big lobster claws instead of hands, stuff like that. Well, neurobiologist and great courses professor Dr. Robert Sapolsky's got a Wondrium series called Being Human. And there's a whole segment on dreams, this underused circuitry of the brain. He talks about the absence of repression and what that does for us. Problem obsession, problem solving with dreams, the altered sleep structures in people who have depression and experience a lot of stress, and how we use dreams to help restore brain energy. It's fascinating stuff. I was able to both watch and listen to the Sapolsky Wondrium series as I sort of move throughout the week from my computer to my phone to my car with the Wondrium app. Wondrium, the subscription video service that just loads us up with so much great information taught by experts in their field to help us understand the world. And it's totally ad-free. I know you're going to love Wondrium just as much as I do. Sign up now with my special URL to start your free trial. Go to Wondrium.com/Seth. Don't wait. Get your learning on today. WONDRIUM.com/Seth. Okay, Yvette D'Entremont, the SciBabe Moment of Science. We begin with Coco the Talking Gorilla. She says, ready your best missives of hate mail, because today I woke up and chose violence. Today's Moment of Science Coco the gorilla couldn't fucking talk. Communication via sign language with non-human primates has been attempted over the years to various degrees of non-success. A chimpanzee named Washoe learned 34 signs in about 2 years, a good deal of those signs being some variation of "open the goddamn fridge now" and "bitch fucking feed me." Nim Chimpsky produced over 20,000 sequences of gestures before researchers realized he was merely mimicking them, likely to get a treat. He knew about 125 signs. In his old age, he attacked multiple researchers and killed a poodle. And then there was Coco. The fable of Coco I grew up with is that she learned sign language by the time she was a year old, had a kitten she loved, formed a close friendship with Robin Williams, and had stern warnings for humanity about what we were doing to the planet. When she passed away a few years ago, an NPR headline said, "Coco the gorilla dies," redrew the lines of animal-human communication. She was also into nipples, to the point where shit got weird. Yes, there are some wonderful videos from the Gorilla Foundation of Coco ostensibly communicating via sign language with her constant companion, Francine Patterson. But we have to ask a few more questions, lest we believe our own eyes. What does it mean to functionally know a language? What differentiated Coco's system of communication from, for instance, your pup's methods of signaling that he's about to shit the carpet? Far less than I expected. Some people who worked with Coco would argue that it's entirely different, that Coco was the first of her species to have acquired a human language, which is at best a sincere exaggeration, if not outright bullshittery. If all they'd claimed was that they'd made strides in interspecies communication using gestures similar to ASL or American Sign Language, the claims would have benefited from a hint of legitimacy. CNN sent camera crews for a talking ape, though, not communication via gestures. A list of criticisms have been levied at the claims made by Coco's trainers. She never exhibited anything resembling grammar. As with Nim Chimpsky, it often seems that Coco is mimicking or responding to researchers. Her trainer referred to her signing as Gorilla Sign Language, a version of ASL modified for the great ape. As such, only a small handful of people controlled the world's access to Coco's speech. Oh boy, there was some creativity in their interpretations. Coco came up with the wrong word? Oh, you silly gorilla, such a sense of humor. She wouldn't say a word until prompted several times. That must mean she's stubborn, and not that she doesn't fucking speak the language. String words together nonsensically, and it could be interpreted that she's thinking abstractly, or that she's invented a new word. It depended on how her team decided to read the tea leaves that day. There's a commercial of Coco giving a warning to humanity about climate change. There are 21 jump cuts in a video that's a bit over a minute, cutting sometimes after Coco's given just one sign. I'm not sure it's altogether believable that she's acquired a human language if, given all the time in the world to prepare a video to show her abilities, this was the best they could do. In 2014, a number of allegations surfaced about the Gorilla Foundation. Coco's diet was unhealthy and included candy, chocolate, and non-alcoholic beer. She didn't get nearly enough activity. She was fed about 100 supplements a day recommended by a naturopath. Also, the organization was sued by 2 former employees because of Patterson's alleged requests that staff show their nipples to the areola-obsessed Coco. Fucking yikes. So do you still think Coco could talk? Or did Coco know a few gestures and have trainers working really hard to make it look like she could talk. This has been your daily moment of science. Pretty sure the only way to sort this out is to hand infinite typewriters to infinite gorillas. I guess since we're talking about animals, let's move to an article that she posted the very next day. Fuck it, she says, let's make some nightmares. Today's moment of science, sea monsters. Evolution sometimes gets trimmed down to the fittest survives, so I shouldn't skip leg day. But with evolution, fittest doesn't mean the strongest or biggest or most poisonous. In many ways, it means the critter that best fits their environment. Australia has every big, strong, poisonous, bitey, scratchy, platypusy critter on this fair earth. They've gone to war with cats, bunnies, and goddamn mice because this planet is determined not to make sense. Then there's the depths of the ocean. A place so dark that Anish Kapoor is buying the rights to it. Nearly goddamn everything about it remained an enigma until recent history. Could anything even survive in a place where humans hadn't been able to venture for most of our existence? Handily. Some of them are adorable little floofs and blebs with bioluminescent features. You just want to boop their snoots and send them on their way. Then there's the phenomenon of deep sea gigantism. You're welcome, or I'm sorry. You'll find a variety of critters of unusual size at the depths of the ocean, many of them crustaceans or cephalopods. There are also some larger-than-life eels and jellyfishes because we needed diverse ways to haunt your dreams. So as we peer into this abyss together, the mind reels, wondering, fucking why? As you get closer to the sea floor, a few things happen. One being that everyone is goddamn cold and hungry, buried under a few zillion gallons of water, pollution, and orca piss. There's a place where no light has warmed a soul or photosynthesized a calorie since 2 supercontinents ago. Kleiber's rule, named for biologist Max Kleiber, proposes that larger species tend to be more metabolically efficient. It could be months before a good-sized meal plummets down sometimes, and a creature with a hummingbird's metabolism isn't going to make it. Bergman's rule suggests that larger animals within a taxonomic clade tend to live in colder temperatures. It's more like a Bergman's guideline, but we see this happening with several groups in the animal kingdom. Additionally, oxygen saturation in the ocean rises as pressure increases, and it's been proposed that gigantism is an adaptation to this. It's not that there aren't large animals elsewhere in the ocean, or that there aren't small animals on the ocean floor. It's that these giants are alarmingly bigger than their cousins. The deep-water sea spider can grow up to 20 inches. A lot of its closest evolutionary cousins are just a couple of millimeters. The giant isopod looks like a mad scientist decided they wanted a bug instead of a pet dog. And lo, a 20-inch yikes! Typically, isopods are about 2 inches. After the giant squid stopped being a myth, the largest one we've met is 43 feet long so far. I'm not sure any of this has been nightmare fuel, but then I didn't talk about the jellyfish yet. This has been your moment of science, reminding you that there are advantages to not being the biggest fish. Well, wait a minute. I didn't pull up the article about jellyfish. I just started here with the gigantic sea creatures. Let me search this. SciBabe jellyfish on her website. Today's moment of science. Okay, there it is. You wanted sea monsters, you're getting more sea monsters. But today we're not talking about powerful fins or sharp teeth. No. We're talking about ancient, gooey, shape-shifting poison wads. Today's moment of science. I will fight every ghost from the Titanic before a single goddamn jellyfish. A lot of bloop bloops we think of as jellyfish are scattered across the tree of life, but the rules on grouping critters are more like guidelines anyway. And I'm going to try these pronunciations here because there's a bunch of them. The Medusazoa subphylum, so named for their telltale bell or umbrella shape, branches off into several groups. The class Scyphozoa are the true jellies, with Cubozoa called box jellyfish and Staurozoa, stalked jellyfish, references to their shapes. Hydrozoans, on the other hand, are a class of medusazoans just different enough that they're not quite jellyfish. Those motherfuckers include the Portuguese man-o'-war. They're considered predators and often work in colonies. They're getting their own WTF Darwin Day. There's quite enough to talk about with jellies without them, because with one hole to rule both realms, they literally can't figure out their ass from their mouth. Depending on your kinks, and I'm not here to judge, perhaps this is a feature, not a bug. It seems whatever they've got is a working system because those jet-propelled sea gummies are older than the dinosaurs. Jellyfish hail from well over 500 million years ago, possibly 700 million, while dinosaurs showed up a mere 245 million years ago. Living fossils, these gelatinous zooplankton, are the oldest known multi-organ animals. If you already knew one thing about them, other than their ability to communicate telepathically with Nicolas Cage, it's that jellyfish come armed with some nasty little stingers. Nematocysts, a type of cell their tentacles can release on contact, are responsible for the infamous stinging, burning, questioning your life decision sensation we've come to associate with these undulating water balloons. This venom is typically used to kill or stun something much smaller than humans for a meal. So many species produce a sting that's mildly irritating to us at worst, but bad news for some tiny crustaceans. On the other hand, the Chironex fleckeri, a box jellyfish known as the sea wasp, is the deadliest of the bunch. With tentacles that can stretch up to 10 feet long and release highly toxic nanidites, just one of these terror sacs is estimated to have enough venom to kill 60 people. Fucking, of course, it's in Australia. I'm just saying that even though most jellyfish probably won't kill you, it's probably best not to use the fuck around and find out method of species identification if you're not an expert. There are a bunch of lovely and enigmatic jellyfish out there that humans have only met briefly in passing. Deepstaria enigmatica looks like a semi-conscious, transparent plastic bag with a butthole, peacefully drifting through the ocean. The Atolla jellyfish doesn't goddamn look real. If you spook it, don't worry about venom, but it'll put on a bioluminescent light show in an attempt to get a bigger predator to come eat you. Clever girl. Stygiomedusa gigantea is possibly the largest invertebrate predator in the deep sea, thriving far from where humans typically venture. It's rarely seen, but proposed to be relatively common, stealthily roaming the depths with a 3-foot-wide bell and drapey arms extending as long as 40 feet to elegantly usher unsuspecting prey to their end. It's the jellyfish's world. We're just living in it. This has been your moment of science. Still panicked at the number of these that I'm not entirely sure aren't aliens. Here's an article from SciBabe that's going to get a lot of people's underwear in a wad. I'm sure it'll provoke some spirited debate. It has to do with nuclear energy. And I'm one of those guys, I think nuclear makes a lot of sense. And she posted some statistics about death rates and accidents and air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions from various types of energy. Coal, of course, is the worst offender, followed by oil, then natural gas, then biomass, hydropower, and then nuclear energy is way down at the bottom of the list, just above wind and solar. Nuclear energy, statistically, when it comes to death rates and accidents and pollution, etc., is in fact one of the safest and cleanest sources of energy. The statistics compiled from Our World in Data, the Journal of Cleaner Production, Nature Magazine, and other sources cited in the study. So she posted this moment of science. She said, "It's hard to figure out exactly how many people have died and will continue to be affected by some of the world's largest nuclear boners." The Soviet Union's official death toll from Chernobyl was clocked at just 31 people because Soviet math is fun. It's a tad doubtful that all the excess deaths in the region over the following years from thyroid cancer and lymphoma were coincidences. Estimates vary and range from 4,000 to 16,000 fatalities in Europe from the accident. The other nuclear disaster that comes even remotely close in overall scale, Fukushima, was far more fatal from the earthquake and tsunami than the radiation. The first fatality attributed to the nuclear component of the fucking worst day ever was 7 years after the disaster in 2018 from lung cancer. How the fuck ever, I didn't bring this up to talk about the dangers of splitting our friend, the atom. I brought this up to tell you that beyond climate change, pits of fire in the Gulf of Mexico and dead birds washing up on the shores of Orange County, fossil fuels used correctly are way fucking deadlier than nuclear energy could aspire to be. It's easy to write off deaths that don't seem so dramatic. Someone dies of lung cancer, you tell yourself perhaps they smoked or it was just their time. It gets harder to write off all the fatalities as coincidence when you poke through the data, and somehow there's an excess of lung issues in areas where the air quality is rotten egg farts. Burning fossil fuels releases fine particulate matter that's out to wreck lungs. PM 2.5 filters are great at managing these, but living in areas where the air quality is typically brimstone, all those tiny particles will add up. According to a study conducted by researchers at Harvard and University College London, there were 8.7 million people who died prematurely from pollution, largely caused by fossil fuels in 2018, which is fortunately lower than the 10.2 million estimated to have died from the same cause in 2012, but still accounts for 1 out of 5 premature deaths in our species. Most of these fatalities are in India and China, but there are hotspots scattered in more populated areas throughout the world. If your reaction is, that's just one study, there are many. Though their numbers vary, nobody's come to the conclusion that fossil fuel emissions are a source of vitamin C or something. Beyond fatalities, this type of air quality degradation from fossil fuels exacerbates asthma, can cause various types of tissue damage, and contributes to cardiovascular disease. It's hard to take up the mantle of fighting an invisible enemy when we've so long accepted that it's just there. Further compounding the issue, at least in America, there are some elected officials who may sooner tell you to suck on a tailpipe for your health than to get a gas-efficient car. I definitely don't have an answer to solve climate change, but the answer is not, and has never been, making an enemy out of nuclear energy. This has been your moment of science, bracing for nuclear-grade hate mail about this one. Man, the comment section went insane. Okay, what's next here? I'm trying to mix it up for you, give you a variety of subjects from Yvette D'Entremont, the SciBabe. Today's moment of science, the Black death. Now, I chose this one because everybody's got pandemic on the brain, but we don't often know, even though we sort of reference the plague, we don't often know a lot about it. And so the SciBabe went back and gave us a primer. And she says this: no matter how much you load up on zinc, vitamin C, or whatever the fuck echinacea is, bubonic plague historically ended the lives of up to 70% of the people infected. The disease can progress to death in just 2 days or opt to torture you for 2 weeks before you meet your demise. The worst flu-like symptoms imaginable are the starter pack with this fucker. Bonus content includes gangrene in the extremities, seizures, and those telltale swollen lymph nodes or buboes that could necrotize and turn black. It was considered a better sign for survival if buboes swelled enough to be lanced, allowing the release of bacteria that would otherwise spread through the body. The Yersinia pestis bacteria can also present as pneumonic plague or septicemic plague, lung and blood infections respectively. These are the nastier plague cousins with chances of survival in the you have to be fucking kidding me range without treatment. Plague is such a goddamn plague that even with treatments available today, the mortality rate is still as high as 15%. So, in 1347, without the advantages of antibiotics, microscopes, or Twitter to fight about the virtues of bloodletting versus humor balancing, some particularly unpleasant fleas arrived in Europe. How the plague hitched a ride to Europe is about as clear as a wrinkled ball sack. The plague's origin was pinpointed by geneticists to the mountains between Kyrgyzstan and China about 2,600 years ago. As for the Black Death in the 1300s, though, some historians are like, I don't know, maybe the Silk Road, maybe the Caspian Sea. There's evidence suggesting that a plague outbreak started in modern-day Kyrgyzstan in 1338, but it's unclear if that was the primary source. The most colorful account of how it started is that the Golden Horde from Mongolia showed up for battle in Crimea with a touch of plague. Making lemon bombs from diseased lemons, they catapulted dead bodies over the city walls in one of the earliest suspected acts of biological warfare. However it got there, once it arrived, bubonic plague promptly and continually ravaged the continent. Quote-unquote cures in the mid-1300s for plague are only funny because we're not the ones taking them. There were the flagellants who thought whipping themselves would lessen God's wrath of the plague, and I can't wait for someone to tell Joe Rogan it worked for them. It was fairly common for people to bathe in urine or rub herbs and spices on themselves, making them an interesting-smelling dead person. My personal favorite was the Vickery method, which utilized a live chicken with a freshly plucked back. Apply the chicken directly to the swollen lymph nodes, and you know it's working when the chicken dies. Or when the patient dies, whichever comes first. Then there was the old standby. Blame the Jews. And do all the state-sanctioned murder you can get away with in the 14th century, which was an alarming bit of murder. None of this stopped the plague, obviously. There wasn't anything at the time that could bring a disease like this to a sudden halt. Social distancing in the form of these newfangled quarantines, the practice of holding sailors in their ships for 40 days before letting them ashore, helped keep things to a dull roar for the next few centuries. Now we've got antibiotics, and we understand hygiene, which might actually be more important in this case. You see, the plague spread too fast for the historically suspected rat fleas to be the main cause. Recent studies have used computer modeling to analyze the possible vectors of rat fleas, human fleas, or airborne transmission. Turns out humans were the plague rats all along, spreading disease to each other from fleas that lived in hair and clothes. It's unclear how much involvement rats had in spreading the disease, or if other animal species were involved, but the rats seemed to be off the hook. It was 14th century bathing standards that were the problem. The Bubonic Plague pandemic of 1347 to 1353 killed more people and likely a higher percentage of the global population than any other single pandemic in recorded history. The disease is still endemic in several countries, and there are typically a handful of cases diagnosed in the U.S. each year. A 2017 outbreak in Madagascar caused 2,417 cases and 209 fatalities. This has been your moment of science, reminding you that we have been unspeakably lucky to live for so long without a pandemic. This is a fun way to learn, isn't it? I've got more to come from the SciBabe. I've got, penguins, of course. SciBabe wants to talk about the fetus. Chiropractic, yeah, I'm going to read that one. She got some other random knowledge in there, and she and I will speak together. We shall fellowship together in the final segment of this broadcast. Lots to come. Hang on. My patrons get this show totally commercial-free, and they get it 2 days early. And your support is so appreciated. It really does make a difference. Patreon.com/Seth Andrews. I'm reading on the broadcast this week random moments of science that have been posted online by Yvette, the SciBabe. She's got a post here with some random tidbits of science, stuff that she said keeps her awake at night. The Moment of Science article is titled, "Hey, Did You Know?" She says, "We still don't have widespread agreements on if a virus, something that can be dead, is technically alive in the first place. Prions, infectious proteins that can cause neurological disorders, are simultaneously not alive and damn near impossible to kill. The largest living organism is a mushroom that makes a blue whale look like a minnow. Genetic tests conducted on samples from all over the 35,000-ton fungus covering 2,400 acres of forest in Oregon confirmed that it was indeed one shroom. It is considered delicious, if not mildly poisonous, when cooked incorrectly. We don't know what color the dinosaurs were. Do with that information what you will, but I'm imagining a fuchsia triceratops. The unfairly maligned blobfish looks pretty fish-like when it's about 3,000 feet below sea level. Bring it to the surface, where it has no business hanging out, and it looks, well, the way you think a blobfish looks. The letter J does not appear on the periodic table of elements. The movie An Inconvenient Truth has an inconvenient myth about frogs in it. A frog put into lukewarm water that slowly heated up won't meet its doom, but will actually hop out when it gets too hot. On the other hand, the idea that a frog dropped into boiling water will escape unharmed, it will likely croak immediately. Human females are covered in stripes that we can't see. All humans are faintly bioluminescent, but the intensity is a few orders of magnitude below what our naked eyes can detect. Hawaii moves about 7.5 centimeters closer to Alaska every year, which seems like the long game to work out those interstate highways. Rats love being tickled, and it makes them audibly giggle and jump for joy. We use 100% of our brains. If you know someone who really only uses 10% of their brain, shit isn't going particularly well for them. Giraffes are kinky fuckers. Before getting down, the female will piss into the male's mouth. It's believed that this is done to check if the female is ovulating, but I think some of them are just into it. New Zealand sits on top of a submerged continent called Zealandia. It's 94% underwater and about the size of Australia. Your dog's mouth is not cleaner than yours. If your mouth is dirtier than an animal that recreationally snacks on cat turds, it means you need to clean your filthy fucking mouth. We still don't know exactly why gravity is a thing, other than it super fucking has to be. This has been your moment of science. Not sure how I'm handling the knowledge that I am glowing like a platypus. In our next article, SciBabe tackles what she calls fetus bullshit. She says, fine, fuck it. We're talking abortion today. If you wander around the internet for a few hot minutes, you're going to find a lot of opinions and very few facts about abortion. So we're just going to rapid fire sort through this because I haven't an iota of a fuck left to give. Well, I have one left to give. Fuck Susan Collins. Anyway. Myth. Most women regret abortions. Reality. A 2018 study supported that the most typical emotional response to an abortion is relief. Only about 6% of patients had mainly negative emotions about the procedure. The vast majority of patients did not experience a change of heart about their choice 5 years out. Myth. Didn't Roe of Roe v. Wade regret her decision, though? Reality, nope. A few years ago, before her death in 2017, Jane Roe, a.k.a. Norma McCorvey, confessed that the pro-life movement threw a small pile of cash at her to bat for their side. Myth. The pro-life movement has always been a thing. Reality. Ronald Reagan signed one of the most liberal abortion laws in the country as governor of California in 1967, 6 years before Roe Republicans and religious organizations we most commonly think of as abortion opponents saw its legality as providing safe medical care for women. There are quotes in support of abortion from Baptist groups from that era that will blow your goddamn mind. Some Catholic anti-abortion groups had already formed in the 60s. Then through the 70s, the pro-life movement gained steam. The broad coalition of the, quote, new right started coming together, in large part around propaganda about protecting fetuses. Myth. Abortion causes breast cancer. Reality. There is no science to back this up. This isn't my conclusion. This is the conclusion of 3 major medical organizations: the National Cancer Institute, the American Cancer Society, and the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. An examination of more than 30 studies by the organization supported this conclusion. Myth. Most abortions happen after a baby is a whole, viable human. Reality. 91% of abortions happen in the first trimester, when you'd be hard-pressed to look at it and differentiate it from a fish fetus. The majority of clinics do not provide late-term abortions, and the procedure has different limitations state by state at various points in pregnancy. Virtually without exception, late-term abortions are due to the types of health issues that leave pregnant women devastated over a baby that was very much wanted. Myth. IUDs cause abortions. Reality. IUDs work by a few different mechanisms of action, one which involves stopping a fertilized egg from implanting. pregnancy begins after an egg implants. If you don't believe me, ask all the people who've been through heartbreaking rounds of in vitro fertilization and have had fertilized eggs deposited that didn't implant. They were not pregnant for the few weeks between deposit and negative pregnancy test. They were simply never pregnant, which is understandable because about half of fertilized eggs just naturally fail to implant. If God exists, and this is the standard for abortion, God's one hell of an abortionist. Myth: the morning after pill causes an abortion. Reality: the morning after pill is like a megadose of the birth control pill. It's recommended to be taken within 72 hours of unprotected sex or birth control failure. Much like an IUD, it can prevent implantation. It can also prevent ovulation. It can't be an abortifacient because nobody's pregnant within 3 days of an "I meant to pull out, but then I thought of Helen Mirren." Myth: abortions have extremely high rates of complications. Reality: yeah, back alley ones with coat hangers and vacuums and giant doses of random herbs tend to be messy. But Americans from 1973 until, give or take, last week, one of those safe and legal procedures gives less than a 0.3% risk of complications that require hospitalization. The fatality rate of all abortions in the U.S. from 1998 to 2010 is 0.0007%. By comparison, complications from pregnancy in the U.S. have a 0.017% fatality rate. It's almost like they're not pro-life. Myth: Jesus and the Bible say abortion is a one-way ticket to hell. Reality: the word abortion isn't in the Bible, and it's definitely not in the super Jesus-y chapters. The Bible is kinda on children as a whole. Hosea 9:14 says, "Give them a miscarrying womb." Isaiah 13:18 preaches, "They shall have no pity on the fruit of the womb, their eyes shall not spare children." Numbers 31:17 espouses, "Now therefore kill every male among the little ones." There is a surefire strategy to reduce abortions, if that's a thing people actually care about. Teach comprehensive sex ed and make access to birth control convenient and affordable. But somehow almost every pro-life organization is against sex ed and against birth control. So pardon me if I find this alleged deep concern for fetuses to be unadulterated bullshit. This has been your Moment of Science, asking Republicans how many abortions they think Trump has paid for. Okay, penguins. And I think penguins are funny anyway, except when they open their mouths. They're terrifying when they... Have you seen their teeth? Today's Moment of Science, this was posted March 24th. Perverted penguins. It's unclear when the first human really set foot on Antarctica. Though American seal hunter John Davis claimed to have done so in February of 1821, it would be disingenuous to say he discovered the continent. In 1819, an English expedition spotted Antarctic islands, and in 1820, a Russian expedition claimed the first known sighting of the mainland in modern times. However, Antarctica still suffered from being in the Antarctic. So navigating through Jesus tap-dancing Christ cold waters was fuck you levels of nope. After a relatively successful trip by British explorers in the 1840s, their general takeaway was, meh, no science here. Could your majesties do a colonialism somewhere warmer? The globe started running low on islands to discover, and somewhere colder would have to do. More exploratory missions started going out in the 1890s, and the first permanent base, a meteorological observatory, was set up just past the turn of the 20th century. Captain Robert Falcon Scott was leading the Terra Nova expedition from 1910 to 1913. It was a multi-pronged scientific venture with plans for exploration and research for teams working on the 65-member crew. One of the scientists on the trip was George Murray Levick, a naval surgeon who took a leave of absence to go exploring. Levick spent 11 months on Cape Adair, including spending winter in an ice cave because Jesus fucking Christ, this guy. He poured about 3 months into observing the Adelie penguins, observing their entire mating and breeding season. From this, he produced 2 works, one for general audiences and one intended for scientists. The latter was never published. Not to kink shame, but the Adelie penguins know what they've done and they need to goddamn apologize. He observed what he called hooligan cocks, i.e., unpaired male penguins acting with, quote, astonishing depravity. They weren't picky either. Dead penguins, both male and female, could make for a convenient hole. A parent had to watch the young at all times because the sexual what-the-fuckery of these single males could kill a chick. Injured female, not only would they take advantage of that, they'd fight over who got to take advantage of that. Levick wrote, "There seems to be no crime too low for these penguins." I never considered the possibility that observational research into the mating habits of birds would be too hot for the scientific establishment, but behold these fuckers. In order to preserve his work, Levick saw fit to write about it using the Greek alphabet. Note, I didn't say he wrote it in Greek. He used the Greek alphabet. But the language was English to disguise the scientific records from prying eyes. 100 years later, George Levick's observations on penguins have been uncovered, further researched, validated, and built upon. With a smidge of penguin necrophilia, Levick still made out better than his captain. Scott had big plans for the expedition, make it to the South Pole first. But Norwegian explorer Roald Amundsen and his crew made it on December 14, 1911. Captain Scott arrived 33 days later, defeated. With morale running low and a mission that was already going poorly, their attempt to get home went even worse. The entire team of 5 perished 2 months later due to hypothermia and starvation. They were 11 miles from safety. This has been your moment of science. Super glad they left some shit out of Happy Feet. All right, here we go. Here goes nothing. Bracing myself, buckled in, ready for the hate mail. Let's get into chiropractic. It's a big article. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I think it'd take me 30, 40 minutes. So I'm going to read, a little more than half of it, and then we'll skip to the end, and we'll talk to Yvette. Here we go. Posted June 22nd, 2017 at the outline, Yvette D'Entremont. The article is called Chiropractors Are Bullshit. You shouldn't trust them with your spine or any other part of your body. And the article says this. The first time I dealt with a chiropractor was in 1999 at a mall kiosk, which seemed like an odd place to encounter a medical professional. I was a teenager working for a few storefronts down selling butterfly clips, and I made the mistake of looking at one of the kiosk's spinal models. The chiropractor on duty promptly came over to let me know how he could fix all my health ailments. Back issues, period pain, even weight loss, whatever was ailing me, this chiropractor was on it. The problem with his sales pitch? I was in perfect health. Nevertheless, he persisted. Despite his enthusiasm for fixing me, I was skeptical. Who the hell peddles real medicine out of a kiosk? Brain surgeons and oncologists aren't at the mall trying to drum up new business from vulnerable passersby. What could a chiropractor do for me? If you're one of the approximately 80% of Americans who have suffered from back pain, you may have been referred to a chiropractor for medical help. In the modern day internet landscape, you'll find chiropractic celebrities like Dr. Josh Axe. He has 1.7 million Facebook followers. Dr. Billy Demoss, 20,000 Facebook followers. And Dr. Eric Berg, 472,000 YouTube subscribers, giving advice that goes beyond managing spinal issues. Both in their offices and on social media, chiropractors have adapted to a marketplace that's demanding more than just pain management. They extol the virtues of an alkaline diet, tell you how to manage stress with detoxing, and wax scientific about the adrenal gland, which, last I checked, isn't in the goddamn spine. Though many patients rely on chiropractors to manage chronic back or neck pain, others delegate overall health maintenance to chiropractic care, to the joy of the chiropractic community and the possible detriment of humanity. Some chiros have gone as far as to adjust the spines of newborn babies, saying that this does everything from alleviating birthing trauma to stimulating the immune system to the point where the little ones don't need to get vaccinated, which should all make you wonder, does any of it work? No, it's absolute bullshit. Chiropractic care, I'm sorry to say, is little more than the buffoonery of a 19th century lunatic who derived most of his medical theory from seances. It has not evolved much since its creation. Chiropractic beliefs are dangerously far removed from mainstream medicine, and the vocation's practices have been linked to strokes, herniated discs, and even death. Chiropractors can't replace your doctor, and I'm amazed that they're still even allowed to practice. You shouldn't trust them with your spine or any other part of your body, and here's why. As the legend goes, chiropractic medicine was born on September 18, 1895, when Daniel David Palmer, a magnetic healer in Davenport, Iowa, met a deaf janitor named Harvey Lillard. Palmer claimed they had a conversation about how Lillard's hearing could be repaired by adjusting his spine. And with a crack of the back, the janitor's auditory woes were cured. This was the launching point for the pseudoscience of chiropractic. From there, Palmer continued to work on his theories, eventually opening up chiropractic schools that still exist to this day. Yearly tuition at the Palmer College of Chiropractic in Iowa, $34,000. The acceptance rate is 100%. And the field of chiropractic medicine emerged. If you didn't already have doubts about chiropractic, I hope your eyebrows were at least raised a little bit by the tale of a deaf janitor having an in-depth conversation about emerging medical theories with a magnetic healer in late 19th century Iowa. It's possible that Lillard never consented to the procedure Palmer performed on him. Some retellings speculate that Lillard was not fully deaf. But it's more likely that because there are no nerves in the back that can actually affect hearing, Lillard's condition was not fixed with a back adjustment. Though some chiropractors are now making an effort to introduce evidence-based practices into their treatment, chiropractic as a whole hasn't evolved like other areas of medicine, with hypotheses, experimentation, and peer review. Instead, it was birthed by a strange combination of hocus-pocus, guesswork, and strongly held religious beliefs. I'm not being hyperbolic when I cite hocus-pocus. Palmer held seances to contact a dead physician named Jim Atkinson, and said that those seances helped him develop chiropractic. As he wrote in his 1914 book, The Chiropractor, quote, "The knowledge and philosophy given me by Dr. Jim Atkinson an intelligent spiritual being, together with the explanations of phenomena, principles resolved from causes, effects, powers, laws, and utility, appealed to my reason. The method by which I obtained an explanation of certain physical phenomena from an intelligence in the spiritual world is known in biblical language as inspiration. In great measure, the chiropractor's adjuster was written under such spiritual promptings. Let's burnish this quotation with some context about what medicine was like in the era in which chiropractic came into being. It would be more than 5 decades before it was known what was wrong with procedures like lobotomies and drugs like thalidomide. The most common causes of death were diarrhea and the flu. We didn't have proper scanning equipment to identify issues in the spine. Smoking was good for you. Bloodletting was still a thing. The life expectancy was below 50 years. It's safe to say there was an opening for a man like D.D. Palmer to emerge and tell people he could fix their problems with a fancy back rub. The defining principle of chiropractic is that health is a state that can be either maintained or lost due to vertebral subluxations. Chiropractors claim that tending to vertebral subluxations stimulates your spinal cord and nervous system. And since your spine and the attached nervous system send signals to everything in your body, if you stimulate the spine through chiropractic adjustments, you will improve the health and vitality of your entire body, or so they say. Subluxation is indeed a medical term, but it's one misused by chiropractors. A subluxation means that a joint in your body pops partially out of the socket and generally pops back in. This can result in damage to the surrounding tissues. I know from experiencing a diagnosed shoulder subluxation that's resulted in 3 surgeries. Chiropractors allege that they can feel vertebral subluxations by hand. Though X-ray imaging was discovered the same year as the inception of chiropractic, it's highly doubtful that the magnetic healer Daniel Palmer would have had access to such a highly advanced technological breakthrough, and thus he identified subluxations through, well, seance science. In the past, some chiropractors have made cagey statements about whether vertebral subluxations can be seen via X-ray. In the 1970s, Stephen Barrett, the founder of Quackwatch, contacted the Palmer School of Chiropractic to see some of its teaching files on the subject. The school replied, quote, "Chiropractors do not make the claim to be able to read a specific subluxation from an X-ray film. They can read spinal distortion, which indicates the possible presence of a subluxation and can confirm the actual presence of a subluxation by other physical findings." Okay. But according to Barrett, the chiropractic community in 1972 met to determine what a subluxation was so they could receive Medicare payments. The resulting document described the supposed X-ray manifestations of 18 types of subluxations, some of which were fancy names for the minor degenerative changes that occur as people age. An actual joint subluxation, however, can be seen on an X-ray, and the appropriate treatment generally involves a physical therapist or an orthopedic surgeon, not fancy back cracking. In the field of chiropractic, fixing these subluxations is supposed to be the key to health. Chiropractic practitioners have been known to seriously downplay genetics or germ theory as reasons why you might get sick. Why would they? Pesky facts don't factor into their bottom line. If this leaves you asking, so when should I go to a chiropractor? Well, that's like asking if you should go to a tarot card reader as a compliment to your psychiatrist. Simply put, there is scant medical evidence that a chiropractor is your best treatment option for anything. The American Chiropractic Association has long claimed that the American Medical Association discriminates against chiropractors by limiting patient access to care by chiropractic physicians and all other duly licensed non-MD. But the AMA is not being discriminatory here. They're acting in the interest of their patients. Medical doctors often refer patients to the proper experts, and outside of a narrow scope of experts, this rarely includes someone who is a, quote, duly licensed non-MD, because that person's views on medicine would not be aligned with their standards of care. A doctor is not a doctor is not a doctor. Still, there's agitation to allow medical exams performed by chiropractors into the mainstream. A recent Wisconsin bill proposed that schools would have to allow exams performed by chiropractors to fulfill sports physical requirements. This seems bad, so I asked some medical doctors for their thoughts on chiropractic. Adam Schechner, a Bethesda-based doctor, said that even in his position as a general trauma surgeon, he doesn't, quote, feel qualified to perform athletic physicals or identify cardiac pulmonary problems. James A. Bishara, a pediatric cardiologist in Louisiana, doubted if a chiropractor could spot issues that typically take years of traditional medical training to identify. Quote, anecdotally, most med students struggle with detecting heart murmurs. Most start to pick up the skill after years of experience or an intensive rotation. I'm skeptical that chiropractic training has that kind of exposure to murmurs to adequately screen. Clay Jones, pediatrician in Newton, Massachusetts, agreed. He said, it takes years to develop true skill assessing the heart via auscultation, he said. But a sports physical is about more than heart defects. This is an important point. Anecdotally, for a large percentage of students, a sports physical will be their only annual contact with a doctor, and those physicals can be life-saving. Nothing has been better for the doctors who want to spread the word of chiropractic and separate you from your money than social media. On Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and maybe even Tinder, these friendly and blandly attractive chiropractors dole out health advice that appeals to people who tend to trust the medical professional with the appearance of being smart. Those loyal to their chiropractors might say that the practitioners who rule the social media landscape are a misrepresentation of the field. But when it comes down to it, there's no difference between a chiropractor who peddles pseudoscience on Facebook and one who works in an office. They're both accredited as doctors of chiropractic. Let's first take a look at Josh Axe. On his Facebook page, Axe, a self-described board-certified doctor of natural medicine, who earned his doctorate in chiropractic from good old Palmer College of Chiropractic, tells you which sunscreens are safe and dispenses snack suggestions. Need a sweet snack that won't unravel your health goals? We have you covered, he writes, linking to a dark chocolate almond butter recipe that contains, by my estimate, more than 1,900 calories, depending on how much coconut sugar you use. The posts on Axe's page run the gamut from minor bullshit like healthy, quote-unquote, healthy recipes to major bullshit like the pernicious claims that you can reverse cavities. You can't. And why is this guy giving dental advice? And that you can treat some painful and potentially dangerous bacterial infections like UTIs and staph with essential oils and antiviral herbs. Again, not so much. He also writes that living a life of purpose can lower dementia risk. Wouldn't that be nice? While it might not concern you that a quote-unquote physician with nearly 2 million followers on Facebook is spending his time posting recipes for face wash, it should pique your curiosity that he's telling people he's never met that they should purchase his products to support any number of conditions, from leaky gut syndrome, not real, to aging. His bone broth collagen formula, now available in chocolate, will set you back $37. That's a funny word, support. It's legal speak for this product is bullshit. Beyond his line of snake oils, it should absolutely scare you that Axe has written articles espousing his anti-vaccine views while speaking glowingly of anti-vax queen Jenny McCarthy's pediatrician. How Hippocratic. That's the word, right? Another chiropractor of social media, Eric Berg, spews his own special kind of bullshit. His favorite thing to harp on is the adrenal gland. He's sure that the biggest issue affecting Americans is not heart disease or cancer, but something called adrenal fatigue syndrome. It's interesting that a chiropractor claims to know so much about this gland, given that care of it usually falls to highly trained endocrinologists. But this doesn't stop Berg from offering an endless array of advice on the subject. On YouTube, he tells his readers how to test for adrenal fatigue. If you can't hold your breath for that long, and if your pupils aren't reactive to light, you might have it, or also, you may be dead. He also made up a thing called the adrenal body type to explain why you might have a gut because you just can't have a little belly fat like most normal people do. There must be something seriously wrong with you. Here's the rub. Adrenal fatigue isn't real. A 2016 review study published in the journal BMC Endocrine Disorders found no evidence that supports the existence of the condition described as adrenal fatigue. Yes, the adrenal glands can develop disorders such as Cushing's syndrome or Addison's disease, but adrenal fatigue syndrome is nothing but a way for Berg to make you feel like a hypochondriac. I've saved my personal favorite celebrity chiropractor, Billy Demoss, for last. Demoss, a close friend of Axe, has never met a pseudoscience he doesn't like. Moss firmly believes vaccines, which he has referred to as shots of pus, are for idiots, an opinion he expressed in a rather unhinged Facebook rant about why pandemics are false flags. Quote, "Boy cries wolf again? What happened to Zika, SARS, the pig flu? Maybe people are waking up to the false flag propaganda. Vaccines will be available for the immune and IQ compromised. The idiots will line up for their shots of pus." Oh, and he's sure that chemtrails are real. May I remind you, this is a man who wants you to trust him with your infant's still undeveloped skeleton. Oh, yes. Demoss is a huge proponent of childhood and infant chiropractic. Demoss's website reads, "Simple chiropractic checkups now can have a lasting impact on your child's long-term health. This is because chiropractic care promotes a properly functioning central nervous system and enables children to build a strong foundation of well-being. Immediate results in children often include a decrease in allergies, a reduction in sleeping disorders, and less hyperactivity." His Facebook videos, in which he manipulates the spine of a child, allege that chiropractic can help problems via stimulating the patient's spinal nerves for everything from the heart to the colon. His website also claims that chiropractic care can have a positive effect on a child's behavior, and that the frequent chiropractic treatment of infants can result in immediate quieting, improved breastfeeding, cessations of crying, muscular relaxation, and sleepiness. Which is odd, because he also somewhat paradoxically claims that kids who receive chiropractic care don't get sick. All this just from cracking the undeveloped skeleton of fragile humans. When a person who compares clouds to the Holocaust also thinks something is good for your child, you should absolutely trust him, right? How many third graders do you know complain about chronic lower back pain? Probably not many. What about congenital back problems? Scoliosis, maybe? Perhaps chiropractic treatment could be appropriate for them, at least according to many chiropractors. The old belief that chiropractic care can treat scoliosis or work as a complement to pediatric care is bullshit. Such a pesky fact doesn't stop chiropractors from marketing to parents. Chiropractors like Billy Demoss have been avidly expanding their reach to children and even infants, claiming that adjustments can treat ear infections, runny noses, and even bedwetting. Do infants need chiropractic care? Absolutely not. But a chiropractor might tell you that an infant goes through intense birthing trauma and needs an adjustment for its general health, or that their treatment will stimulate a child's nervous system and prevent the need for vaccines. And they'll tell you that the adjustments will be so gentle they wouldn't bruise a tomato. So which is it? Gentle or strong enough to replace vaccines? The proliferation of pediatric chiropractic is working. Children accounted for 17.4% of chiropractic patients in 2010, up from 9.7% in 1991, per the National Board of Chiropractic Examiners. Some chiropractors may claim to have a gentle touch with children, but that doesn't mean what they're doing isn't dangerous. There are well-documented case studies of children being severely injured by chiropractic. Though injury rate is difficult to determine, when they do happen, they seem to be severe, including subarachnoidal hemorrhage and paraplegia. Chiropractors can also cause damage by being used for primary care or emergency medical needs, as their training is not appropriate for such care. In 2014, the woman behind the blog Modern Alternative Health, one of my favorite pseudoscience enthusiasts, took her toddler to a chiropractor after noticing that he wouldn't crawl on one of his arms. The chiropractor somehow missed that her son's arm was broken, and the injury was not detected until many days later when they visited an emergency room. I asked several pediatricians if they'd ever referred a child to a chiropractor. They all said no. Despite the American Chiropractic Association's firm support of chiropractic care for children, which states that, quote, the evaluation, diagnosis, care, and management of the pediatric patient is within the scope of chiropractic care, and that pediatric chiropractic care, when administered properly, is effective, safe, and gentle. Medical doctors caution that chiropractic care is inappropriate for children. Scott Krugman, the chairman of the Department of Pediatrics at MedStar Franklin Square Medical Center in Maryland, said that he hadn't met a pediatrician who recommended a patient to see a chiropractor. He said, we all have patients who go, but not on our recommendations. He also pointedly mentioned that chiropractors claim they can cure ear infections without owning an otoscope. Byron White, a Virginia-based pediatrician who writes at The Scientific Parent, told me that he's never referred a patient to a chiropractor and never will. Quote, the field is based on shaky concepts. Everything that comes from it is the fruit of the poisonous tree. Okay, I'm going to stop there, I think. Again, it's a long article. I'm going to put the link in the description box if you want to finish it out. The author, Yvette D'Entremont, the SciBabe, analytical chemist and science educator, will join me on the broadcast in just a second. Hang on. Yvette D'Entremont. She is a scientist, like an actual scientist. She does chemistry, and I guess she does it pretty well. She runs SciBabe.com. She is the author of the Moment of Science articles we've been sharing on the show, and she's kind enough to join us here. Yvette, how you doing?
I'm doing good, Seth. How you doing, my friend?
So you went to, we were scheduling you for the show, and you said you were going to Disney, or you went to Disney. Now, you're in California, so it's Disneyland, right?
Indeed, the one that sends the tax dollars not to Ron DeSantis.
Dear God, every time I see hashtag Florida, right?
Oh, it's like, you know, you want the stereotype of hashtag Florida man to not be true, but like Ron DeSantis was like, and I shall become the omnipowerful Florida man. Like, he just saw it as a, you know, it's challenge accepted. I will like. It's sad because I know that the reason that we have the reputation of Florida man is the sunshine laws, blah, blah, blah. But Jesus, why?
Yeah. Well, you know, it's funny because I'm well tied in with a lot of free thought groups down there. And I'm sure they wake up every day thinking, get me off this planet, not just out of Florida. I know somebody who's a scientist who works in Florida, and he's just packing up. He's like, get me the hell out of here, and that's totally understandable. I thought Oklahoma was bad. So, I've been trying to do justice to your moments of science, reading a potpourri of different articles. Is this a product of COVID? Like, were you just sort of in your little isolation pod and thought, screw it, I need to science somehow?
It's my science isopod articles. Oh, I should do an article on isopods. This was the confluence of several things. One, I couldn't keep, destroying people's careers was not a sustainable model for the long term for my mental health. Like every time we wrote an article about one of these definitely not scam artists, because I would never accuse someone of being a scammer. It was just such an arduous process of trying to not get sued that I was losing my mind. Like there were a ton of articles that didn't get published because we were like, yeah, this is airtight, but also the person I wrote it for didn't want to publish because we're like, we're just so sure that this person's a litigious jackass that we're going to get sued.
Yeah, gee, I mean, even if it's a frivolous lawsuit, it's a time and money drain, and they can use that as leverage against you or any of their critics.
And it looks bad if I get, it doesn't look great for me if I get sued. So the number of times I'd put, weeks, sometimes months of work into an article for a place that, I was on as a columnist or a staff writer for, and we'd done a lot of work. And that just basically became work lost and time lost, because if people see weeks and months on end of me not putting out another piece of writing for one of the places that they know I write for, it's like, what are you doing, Yvette? What are you doing with all this time? And it's like, what am I doing with all this time exactly? If I'm not, if my main thing is takedowns, if my main thing is going after these people that are promoting pseudoscience, what exactly is the point? If the takedowns aren't stopping people from supporting pseudoscience, if it's not getting people away from being anti-vax, I gotta change direction somehow. I have to make this more sustainable and into something that feels like it's making a difference somehow. And then COVID happened. And the first year was just kind of all reaction, like, okay, we got to get good information out. And there were, a few times I was trying to write articles at the beginning, and we found ourselves like, everything would be fact check. It would be right. And then it would be published. And like the day after it came out, it would be wrong because information was moving so quickly during the pandemic. And it was really frustrating. And, I'm not the only one that had that frustration, obviously. Every science writer I know did. But I got to the point where I'm like, I want to be able to do something that still feels like I can write evergreen articles. I want to get good information out to people. I want to feel like I'm making somewhat of a difference in people's ability to think about the world. And one day I was chatting with my friend James Fell, who a lot of our audiences know. He writes the This Day in History Shit Went Down column. And we've been writer buddies for a while. And I was trying to find something that I could do that was, kind of a regular column. And, I'm like, all right, how about it's kind of a play on a moment of silence. I'm like, how about a moment of science? And it just kind of in a conversation with him like a week before New Year 2021 started. And he was like, yeah, do it. Sounds perfect. And I was like, well, it just happened. And we just, it was like, all right, I'm going to try to do an article a day. And that was doing really well for a while on an article a day until I became an only child. I was doing super good at doing my schedule for that. But no, it started just as a way to keep doing what I feel has always been kind of my mission, is get information to people in a way that makes them laugh, makes them feel smarter about the world, and makes them feel like they've got more tools to think critically about things around them. And I think having that historical perspective, it's kind of a thing I kind of try to imbue into this now, is helpful, especially given how people have not been thinking about things very historically through COVID.
I was going to, only because you sort of referred to it, I was going to sort of dance around this because I know the wounds are really raw, but I'm very sorry for the loss in your family. I've been following, what happened, and I think all of our hearts just break for you. So
thank you. Yeah, it's been, like, to say anything less than it's been rough would be an understatement.
Forgive me. I know there are some people probably wondering what it is we're talking about. Again, not to camp out here, but for context. So, my brother
kicked it last August unceremoniously. He was 11 days shy of turning 41. It was lupus-related complications. I mean,
the rug got pulled out from underneath you. There's no doubt.
He was on the phone with my mom less than an hour before he passed away. My sister-in-law got home and found him just gone in his armchair in his office.
Well, I'm hugging you right now, Yvette.
I appreciate it.
That's all I got from here in Oklahoma.
Yeah. No, it's I don't want to. I don't want to dwell on the incident of the day that it happened. Like that's.
Well, and again, I was thinking, this has sort of been a show about levity and education, but I didn't want to. I felt like we could acknowledge it there. I've put you through enough on this issue. Let me make an awkward segue back to James Fell, if I may.
I appreciate that. But
you and James have this in common. You are educators, but you also have you have panache. You have a flair. You have a style.
We have a tendency to say the word fuck a lot.
As people who are listening to the articles that I just read have noticed. And you mentioned, too, sort of the moving target of COVID. I think there's a broader science question here. One of the critiques we hear from a lot of people is, well, the instructions are different today than they were last week. How can we trust science? How can we trust the WHO or the CDC or Fauci because their information's always changing? Do you want to address the moving target aspect of science overall?
I understand why people would have those questions because I have those questions too. I get annoyed with the CDC when they change their advice day to day, but I get annoyed when they change it for no good reason. And I think the question we should have is, what's the reason for the change in advice? Is it a good reason? Is it a bad reason? And help me understand that reason. And I think a lot of times because, humans, myself included, we're panicky critters and we want to know, which way is the pack of monkeys running so I can run with them so that we're going away from the fire, and we're looking at the CDC as though they're also a panicky pack of monkeys when they're the one pack of monkeys that's like, all right, we know how the fire works. We have to remember that we're not all panicky monkeys. I say this as, like I said, a likewise panicky monkey. But the thing about science is that if it stayed the same, if the CDC said the same thing about COVID day 1 that it did day 700, I wouldn't trust the CDC anymore because that's the thing about science. Much like viruses, it evolves. When we know more, we have more information and better information, and the way that we understand a thing changes. We can tell you more in depth. It's not that the information we had yesterday meant that we were telling you shit yesterday, or the stuff we're telling you today means that we were lying and we're telling you evil stuff today. It's that, we found out a new thing. So we have to try to understand. We have to work that into our understanding and give you better info today. So new info today doesn't mean deceit yesterday, or we're trying to trap people into their face masks forever. It's more like maybe microbes are tricky. Yeah. They take a little bit of time. How many hundreds of years was it until we figured out a way to get smallpox under control? The hundreds that I can go through the history of smallpox, of polio, of all these other ones. And there's always a learning curve. But the advice being different at the end is not a sign that you're being lied to. It's a sign that science is doing what it does and we're learning and observing and getting better at something with time.
How much of the stuff that your publishers, publications, these third-party outlets didn't want to publish, how much of that did you drag into your moments of science on your personal pages?
A lot, quite a bit.
And you didn't fear litigation as much over there? I mean, you felt more latitude and freedom, or what?
Some of it I had my own lawyers look through, and that was helpful. And I was just like, hey, what do you think? Do you think this is going to get me into trouble? And it was a lot of looking through it going, this is perfectly fine. One of it was I went after. Now, to be fair, one of the things I did take kind of I just take a coward's way out of publishing and put it into my Patreon only content. I went after these guys who made this piece of bullshit exercise equipment called the Bionic Gym. And I had published this publicly a couple of years ago. Now, I called it the electric boogaloo shorts. And God, the phrase boogaloo is ruined forever now, but that's another rant. But they'd made these shorts that do you remember the ab belts, those things that we're going to shock your abs.
Yeah.
And you'll have 6-pack abs without leaving your... It's like that, but these electrified leg wraps that the video of this guy using them, he looks like he's having a complete ass seizure on his couch, while he's sweating and panting and his legs are doing these weird jerky motions and he's claiming it's real exercise. Now, I had major problems with this because he claimed that he'd trained himself to run a full marathon just by wearing these shorts on his couch. And I'm like, So I've run a few marathons and fuck off. Like, you cannot expect people to believe this.
Wait a minute. Now, I pulled up the website. I see Ellen DeGeneres has...
No. Oh, this is better. So the Ellen DeGeneres thing, I found the clip, and the clip is in my article. I found the clip from Ellen. They weren't saying, now when on the Ellen show, they said, you got to see this to believe this. It was not a compliment, my friend.
Okay.
Like, they put the clip on to make fun of it. So they've been super cagey in their advertising. They were like, oh yeah, we researched this with the European Space Agency. I contacted the European Space Agency because I'm SciBabe and fuck off. Like, I contacted them and they were like, yeah, so we let them use our zero-G rocket to go check out how these things worked in zero-G. They never gave us any data. Using the rocket doesn't mean the European Space Agency approves of or uses the technology, but they gave us no data. And the only thing, like, and when I begged, like, I asked over and over again, can you show me the data? Show me any of your data. All they sent me was a picture of them floating in the zero-G rocket.
Wow.
Like, they would not send me any data. But yeah, these, like, when I finally published my article, and I did this super carefully, like, and I tried writing this with Seth, and Seth was like, no, we're going to get nailed legally. Tried writing up with the outline, and then the outline closed. So there were some legal issues with publishing it, but then I ran it by, I do not want to throw, like, one of our favorite lawyers within the skeptic community who runs a podcast about lawyerly stuff. Take that for what you will.
Sure.
He looked over, he's like, I think this is fine. You should be good to go. But like, and I published it on SciBabe forever ago. Then SciBabe kind of had the website crashed ages ago, and I'm like, I don't know what to do with this. So when I started doing the Moment of Science, I'm like, I'm going to put this out there for the patrons. But since that had happened, they started sending the Electric Boogaloo shorts out to people, and like, people are getting mixed results and like, people who are still like firm believers and are like, oh yeah, I'm sweating a lot. And I'm like, yeah, you're sweating, but like, are you losing weight? Are you in any better shape? Is your resting heart rate lower? And they have no data that shows these things because it's just an ab belt, but on your ass. And when I put this article out the first time, when I first published it on SciBabe.com publicly, they got very mad at me. They put a bunch of angry little missives out at me. And yeah, so that's the one time that I've taken a really hard swing at someone since, but like, it's on Patreon because I'm like, I don't know what I can say about these people legally because they haven't put out any new bits of research. They're like, oh yeah, we'll put out new research after we have it out. It's like, that's not how proving something works. Like,
well, it sounds to me like it's a little bit of a challenge. Publications being so timid then becomes part of the problem. Right? Yeah.
And I don't blame them because people are litigious pricks. Like, how do I convince someone to take a risk on my, writing about a random jackass when I could just write a funny thing about a platypus for them that'll get as many clicks? Like, where is the upside to a publication to letting me go on a long rant about known asshole Mark Hyman? Why should they take that risk about letting me go off on Steve Pinker, who's always exaggerating how good the world is when things are really bad and a ton of people in poverty? Why should they let me do that when they know that I could just write a funny thing about a wombat? There are these trade-offs. So I just decided I could write about wombats, and far fewer people are going to scream at me.
Well, though, I have to ask, did you get more hate mail on the Chiropractic article, or did you get more hate mail on Coco the Talking Gorilla? Because people love them some Coco out there, right?
To be fair, I was on Joe Rogan's show for the Chiropractic article. So, like, there are 2 hate websites devoted to me from the Chiropractic article. But Coco, people are super, I don't know if you read if Coco's one of the ones you read to your audience. But
yes.
Yeah, so for anyone who hates me, I'm not sorry. Coco couldn't talk. Kill your dreams. Coco was silent. Look, and here's the thing with the Coco article, that was one of the first ones that I was like, sorry guys, I need an extra day to write this because I really wasn't sure. Like, it was kind of a shock to the system to me because I started writing that one to write the story of Coco the gorilla who could obviously talk. Because why would I set out to stomp on people's dreams about a dead gorilla? Like, that seemed cruel.
Well,
and
one of the best parts of the Coco story for me is, and you reference this in the article, is sort of Coco is thoughtful enough to give us an existential message about the warming of the globe. And, literally a warning to all of humankind for the generations. And I thought, God, that's deep for the gorilla, right? And of course, SciBabe jumps in and says, warning, red flag.
And that was one of the things that sold us on this gorilla. Like, obviously, the gorilla not only could the gorilla talk, the gorilla knew that humanity was ruining the planet. Like, why didn't we call bullshit on this sooner? Why? Like, people are like, no, but Coco was friends with Robin Williams. No animal could possibly have faked that. Dude, Robin Williams could have tickled any animal and they would have been like, yes, this is a known good thing. People got so mad about that and thought I was just out to give them a bad day. Like, I didn't want that to be the truth. But
there's a lesson there about human nature, right? We have an emotional attachment to something that gives us joy or helps to complete us in some way. And when that's challenged, we have this, it's almost like you've come after a beloved member of the family. And I think people do that with a great many subjects, be it chiropractic or be it Coco or be it, some of the other stuff, nuclear power, right? I read that piece and talk about a contentious issue. And I used to be that guy, like nuke bad, coal good. I came out of the Fox News culture where we're like, yeah, this is freedom, right? Coal is freedom. The more pollution, buy the bigger truck and rev the engine, damn it, right?
Why don't we see splitting atoms as freedom? I think the freedom to control the very forces of the universe, that's freedom. But and this is something that I've reposted this one article of mine over and over and over again. Now, no matter what, I will never be pro-nuclear enough for the nuke bros, and it's always the nuke bro. Like, there are going to be some people that'll be mad at me for pointing out that this is a gendered thing, but I never get women as mad at me for nuclear stuff as there's this core group of nuke bros that they got to defend the atom, my friend. They have to defend it to me, a chemist who's pro-nuclear.
Now, what do you mean by nuke bro? I mean, you mean they've taken it to the nth degree, like it's a cult of nuclear?
There was one article that I wrote that I think I said I made a very small concession to the fact that I had to convince myself, I just a passing comment that I'm like, man, I got to convince myself that this area that used to be contaminated, it's perfectly safe. But, it's real. It's weird to me in my brain that it's completely safe now, but I trust the science. But the fact that I put it out there that, I'm a human being who I have to convince myself that it's safe. They were like, you just gave yourself away as not being pro-nuclear because you don't trust the science. I'm like, I just said that I do trust that it's safe, but because I knew that this area was radioactive before, it blows my mind a bit. But there's always someone who, no matter what, unless you 100% unwaveringly are any bit of radioactivity never freaks me. You got to be able to go up and lick the uranium for some people.
Well, I mean, I think I get the concern that, there's a tsunami and an earthquake in Japan and the reactor goes south and then you've got what might be hundreds of years of contamination. I mean, not just the human error.
That's a normal concern.
I mean, I get that. But in your article, you're talking about how we've been breathing carcinogens since the Industrial Revolution and nobody blinks.
That's kind of the point that I try to get through to people. And it's an article comparing deaths from fossil fuels to deaths from nuclear issues. And here's the thing, even when fossil fuels are used correctly, if we keep using fossil fuels the exact way they're being used now and nuclear the exact way it's being used now, fossil fuels are going to continue to kill 8 to 10 billion people a year. And that's in the more polluted parts of the world. In the cities, there are certain parts of the world where you're going to see a certain number of fatalities from lung issues, from different types of cancers. And that is just year in and year out. Fatalities from burning fossil fuels. That's when they're used right. Nuclear, when it's used correctly, is not doing that. In the history of nuclear, has not killed a fraction of the people that fossil fuels kill every year. every year. It will not catch up in 1,000 years. It won't, like, unless there's just ongoing nuclear annihilation of the entire planet. Like, unless this World War III thing we're leading into goes really south. Like, we're not going to catch up with the nuclear fuckery versus the oil disaster that we just keep digging ourselves a little further into.
So I sense in you a little bit of cynicism about the future. I mean, that may be a reach.
The last few years, it's been, brother dying, Europe going to war, and everything about the American political system getting a little bit worse, we're us not listening to each other, us not trusting each other a bit more, and people leaning into their worst instincts a little more. And I hope no one hears me say this and thinks that I'm both sidesing it, because I'm not. But I also see that there are people more on one side than on another. And of course, I do have my own bias, but I think my bias is right, as we all. But that we do see an accelerationist bent in one party of the U.S. more than another. And I think a lot of them are coming to a head all at once. And that's kind of terrifying.
The most diplomatic way of phrasing the evangelical right-wing white supremacy nutbar QAnoners are about to fuck up the entire country even more. That's just a guess as to where you were going with it.
I'm terrified that white nationalists are going to destroy the country that I thought was going to be okay. I'm learning a couple other languages depending on where I think I'm going to have to move one day. I don't know what's going to happen to this country that I was raised on the promise of the Gen X economy, and I turned 18 the year of 9/11. I'm just saying nothing turned out the way I thought it was going to.
The woman is scarred. She's scarred, mind you. Okay, well, I've kept you long enough, but tell me, do you have any moments of science we should anticipate, or is this just sort of a wait and see what's in the headline, what's in your radar next kind of deal, or what?
It was funny. Beginning of the year, I started off with a plan for like a series of moments of science on Chernobyl, and it's like it's gotten... That was like got to be the big project for the year. And every time I sit down to write a thing on Chernobyl, it's like it feels oddly more complicated by the fact that Chernobyl is currently being dug up by Russian soldiers. And this isn't a thing to say there will be no more Chernobyl, because trust me, I'll be hopping into that one regularly. But it's a thing that's reminded me that history is not a thing in the past, and it's a thing that we should try to remind ourselves of as we're living through some historical bullshit. We're always living through history. It's being made as we're sitting through it. And it would behoove us as skeptics and as people who try to, who like to see ourselves as logic-driven critters, to look at science and look at all these things as stuff that takes place within a historical context, as stuff that's always had, I don't want to say outside forces, because that sounds a little Alex Jonesy, but, it's had forces and has had circumstances acting on the types of things that are happening in science. So, keep an eye to the stuff that's happening around you in society, not just to the logic and the science, because I think you need to know a little bit more about the world that the science is happening in, and it's informed the writing that I've done a lot more in the last year.
I like that phrase, logic-driven critter. I think we should all aspire to that. What's the best way to find this stuff? Is it your Facebook? I'll send people to your Patreon, obviously, but what's the best way to find you?
Over facebook.com/SciBabe, and of course SciBabe.com if you want to stay away from all the conversating. But over at facebook.com/SciBabe, so that's where all the conversations happen. And I have a Discord, but that's linked over in the, you can find that via the
Discord. I've just joined TikTok. I feel like my grandparents. I'm having a hard time.
I don't Seth, I don't do the tickety-talk enough. We need to hire a Gen Xer to do this stuff for us. Is there a Gen Xer who can take care of our stuff?
I feel
We're getting old.
I feel you. Yvette D'Entremont, you are always a joy. Thanks for letting me read your stuff on the show. Let's talk again soon, okay?
Definitely. Thank you for having me, Seth.
Follow The Thinking Atheist on Facebook and Twitter for a complete archive of podcasts and videos, products like mugs and t-shirts featuring the Thinking Atheist logo, links to atheist pages and resources, and details on upcoming Free Thought events and conventions. Log on to our website, thethinkingatheist.com.